Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it's a life motto for us around here, but when you find something so genius, it just makes you want to scream it from the mountaintops, and I think that's what we're doing now. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more, as always. My name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to assume that you do because you're listening right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we are on the Instagram, or IG as the kids call it, either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because we love to cover everything, man. We love to cover TV, films, video on demand, film festivals. We try to do as much as we can. And, you know, if you love reading about and listening about stuff to watch, then we'd love to have you. So please come on by. Oh, boy. On this one, when you find movies that just make you happy for all the right reasons, you just want to talk about it. And on this episode, we're talking about the Souvenir Part II. We should have published this episode a while ago. This is definitely falls into the rubric of our bad. But for those who don't know, the Souvenir, both Part 1 and 2, it's the tale of a tumultuous relationship and sort of the aftermath therein, because it's about falling in love with someone who you shouldn't, and then something happens, and then you have to untangle that love, and it's a pretty crazy thing, but it's really a masterpiece of filmmaking, both films, from British writer-director Joanna Hogg, and it stars Tilda Swinton and her daughter Honor Swinton in her first role, and it's just overall one of the best films of last year, which I cannot recommend enough. And we had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with Joanna just to talk about not just this film, but why this was in two parts, her career in general, and just sort of the business at large. And it was a fantastic talk, which I certainly hope you enjoy, because between you and me, I know that I did. Obviously, first off, congratulations on the film. I absolutely loved it. I think I enjoyed it more than the first part, to be perfectly honest. But I think I'm curious. Why did you feel the need to sort of take this story, which you could take as one story, but break it up into two chapters?
Yeah, well, I felt it had a natural kind of division between the two. I was never going to make just the first part without the second part, because it's just I felt always, well, since 1988 actually, because I first had the idea of making this story into a film or into two films way back then. So I always saw it as Julie the character experiencing a relationship in the first part, and that being sort of contained, and the relationship really taking over that story, and then her processing it and in a way creating something out of it. So it was always very clear it needed those two parts, and something about just incorporating it into one film. It wouldn't have expressed the sort of positive negative element of it, the sort of what two sides of the same thing. I don't know. I don't know if I can do any more.
No, but I think I agree with you. I mean, having that beat and allowing sort of audiences to reflect and think on what was, as we sort of get into what is, was really an interesting sort of choice. And I think it added sort of depth and layers to it all, which allowed us to connect with it a bit more emotionally, if that makes sense.
Yeah. and that, yeah, you don't have to see them both back to back in that
Right.
way. You can come back to it, or I mean, I've come across people who've only seen the second part and yet to see the first part, or you can travel in different directions and in different ways with it. It seemed more interesting to me. But I have to say, you asked me that question of why these two films, and I don't even remember thinking about it. It just had to be like that.
That's amazing. And I mean, I love seeing Julie's journey. I mean, just especially as she's making the film. And I mean, obviously not without giving too much away, but in when we finally get to see her work, it almost felt like I was watching a scene out of the Red Shoes. It felt very sort of ethereal and very sort of in the subconscious, if that makes any sense. Like, how important was it for you to, once we finally get to this penultimate moment of seeing her work and seeing her process, that it felt very sort of experiential as opposed to just the audience watching something on another screen?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to connect with her as a student and what she'd do. And I think in the end, I see it as more what's inside her head than actually what she makes herself, because we
Yeah.
see her shooting a different film. It also involves the relationship she experiences in part one, but it's done, she's cast other people in it. And so the idea that she herself is suddenly thrown into this story, as she's sitting there, not wanting to give away too much to people who haven't seen it yet, but as you see her sitting there in the cinema, in the theater, it's what she's thinking rather than what she's really seeing in front of her. And that was interesting to me. And it was done quite spontaneously in a way, this film. I mean, we felt like students when we made it, because we were shooting the rest of the film, and each day we seemed to be shooting a different, something different. We might either shooting Patrick's film or Garance's film. We constantly, or a pop video. It was a very varied shoot in that way. And then Julie's film, we knew we were going to arrive at that because we're shooting everything in story order. So we shoot that towards the end of our shoot. And yet we hadn't worked everything out about it. And I didn't want to work everything out about it because I wanted to see how Julie's journey was going to go as we went on her journey. And so, yeah, it was really thrown together. And we felt very much like students, as I said, doing it, because we had limited budget left at that point, and and resources and time, really limited time. So but it was fun.
Can you talk a little bit just in terms of casting honor for Julie? Because I mean, she obviously does such a great job, but I can imagine as an actor, getting a chance to sort of go through sort of an entire emotional arc like she does has to be a fascinating experience. And seeing it play out on screen was a beautiful thing.
Oh no, I'm glad you think that. I mean, I think she's really remarkable, and considering she'd never been in a film before, never been in, played a fictional character like that, she was really incredible. And then we all grew through the two films, because it was quite a few years. There was shooting the first one, and then there was a year in between before shooting the second one. So a lot of life was lived alongside the making of these two films. Yeah, Honor seemed almost from day one to have done it before. She just went into the story so comfortably and so instinctively, and and very skillfully, even though she'd never studied acting or as I say, been in a film before. So it was quite incredible. And I didn't know myself how it was going to be with her before we started shooting, because I didn't do any screen test with her. I just thought, I had a strong instinct she was right. And I've done this before with non-actors, where I've thought, I want that person in the film, but I don't know how it's going to be. And for me, that's part of the excitement, is actually not knowing until that first day of shooting how that person is going to be in front of the camera, even if they're going to be photogenic or have presence. I just don't know, but I have a very strong instinct.
Well, and I mean,
It'll work.
I know their career arcs are very different, but in many ways, it feels like Honor and even Tom in your earlier films almost have a bit of a connection in this way, because they're giving us these real revelatory performances that maybe people hadn't expected, if only because people hadn't seen them work before.
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, Tom is a good example, because when we made Unrelated, he hadn't, I think he'd made The Gathering Storm, a TV series. So he had done a bit of screen work, and then he'd been to RADA, so he'd been to drama school, unlike Honor. So very different in that way. But at the same time, they were, they're both very incredibly instinctive performers. And so, yeah, there is some parallel to make. And Tom, was really, he was just able to sort of be in front of the camera, and has an incredible presence.
You've always been very, I mean, especially in the style of the way you make your films, you focused on long shots, allowed the frame to sort of linger and let the characters sort of do the work. And I mean, I'm curious, are you, as a screenwriter as well, are you precious to the words on the page, or do you really, how much do you allow the actors to sort of play in the moment, especially when you're crafting a scene that they're going to be in frame for a long time?
Yeah, well, first of all, there aren't many words on the page, actually. So I know in advance that I'm going to ask a lot of my performers, and that I want them to really be in the moment, and I want to see what they come up with. So I set the scene, and then a lot happens in their hands. So and I find that really, again, very exciting to see something unfold and not know exactly how it's going to unfold. So what's on the page is minimal. It's a description, a visual description of what's going on. There's a lot of description about what's going on inside the characters' heads, which you're never going to see in the film. And then little bits of dialogue like you might get in a novel, but not, it's not, it doesn't look like a conventional script. And it's only about 30 pages long.
Well, I mean, I love that you say that, because I mean, I've got to ask you a bit of a nerdy question, but I'm going to go back, because you did a YouTube video for Criterion a few months back, and they had you in the closet, and you mentioned just how much you love reading the booklets inside so many of the films that they put out. And I'm curious, for you as a filmmaker and a storyteller, how much does reading about the process inform you as much as just watching the process get done?
Well, I mean, it's so much. I love reading about the process, and I love reading how a certain film was made. I don't know, reading about 8½, for example, about what Fellini wanted to do, and the trials and tribulations of making a film. I mean, I get so much from reading about the stories behind the making of films, and what was in the filmmaker's head at the time, that from a sort of creative point of view, and what goes into my own films, I think I get I sort of take so much from that, more than actually watching the film itself. Not that I don't get pleasure, obviously, watching the films themselves. Of course I do. But in terms of inspiration, I take a lot from these different experiences I read about.
Where do you find the most freedom as a storyteller? Because obviously you've done a few films, you worked in television, you've worked in photography, in the art scene. Where do you find sort of the most creative freedom for you to sort of do the things that you want to do?
Yeah, well, I'm finding it more and more difficult to find that creative freedom, because when I think of freedom, I mean time and space.
Right.
And I need a lot of time, no other appointments or anything else to do. I need a sort of day or a number of days stretching out in front of me in order to tune into whatever it is I want to make a film about. It takes me days and months and years even to tune into these things. And I'm finding it more and more as demands on me increase as a filmmaker, and in a good way, that it's good that people are interested in what I'm doing. But I find that time, that space that I need to create, more and more precious and harder to find. So it's not even a specific situation I need to be in. I think I just need to be somewhere, well, not even quite quiet, because I could be sitting in a noisy cafe and get lots of inspiration, but I need to have nothing else to worry about around me in order to tune into something. It's very precious, that time.
Was there a film or a piece of work that you saw in your younger days that was sort of the pivot point moment for you that made you want to get into be a filmmaker?
Particular film, I mean, I found definitely the early 1980s a very exciting time for cinema, and I saw so many films that gave me made me feel excited for the medium. And I mean, what springs to mind, this is just an example because I saw so many films at that point in time. I mean, I know Bertolucci's 1900 springs to mind, which is an incredible piece of work. And so I think the sort of breadth of that I found incredibly exciting, and just the storytelling and the involvement I felt in that story. So that was just off the top of my head. And then there was, I mean, it's not the first time I mentioned these films, but seeing Scorsese's New York at that time, King of Comedy, the One from the Heart and all that jazz. There was a particular time, the sort of late 70s. I think those films didn't arrive in the UK probably to the early 80s, but there were so many things many films I can think of that I saw. And of course that was beginning of my film student days. So then obviously, seeing all of Fellini's films, all of Rossellini's films. I mean, it was incredibly rich time.
Now, I'm curious because, I mean, as someone who is obviously a film fan and also a filmmaker, is it a little surreal to stand in a place like the Criterion Closet and see an archive like this and understand that, wait, something I did might actually be a part of this in some way, shape, or form? Like, just in terms of knowing that you've made stuff that will survive and will get looked at by other people as years go down the line.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope so. I don't take that for granted by any means. I mean, I was really, it's cliche, but I was a kid in a candy store in there. I mean, it was incredible. But I guess I wasn't thinking while I was in there that I might be there. I was just thinking, oh, I want all these DVDs. I want as many as possible, and read as many booklets as possible.
Well, you know what? I mean, I only discovered your work in Souvenir, and then I managed to backtrack and see all the other stuff. And I mean, I'm a huge fan, and this was an absolute delight. And I mean, Souvenir Part 2 is it's a stunning piece of work that I really think creates this fantastic emotional experience for audiences to get behind and enjoy and really sort of appreciate. And I just want to thank you for the work, and thank you so much for the time today. This was an absolute delight.
Oh, well, for me too. It was a real pleasure to meet you. And I'm so happy to hear you say that.
Well, thank you very much. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.